Today's episode of Children of Heroes took us about 2 hours west of London, to the historic city of Bath, where we spoke to Dr. George Scott, the son of Staff Sergeant Jiří Šnábl.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your father served in the Czechoslovak army in the United Kingdom during the Second World War. In fact, he fled Czechoslovakia in 1939. How did he manage to come to England?
If I can describe my father and what he did, I would describe that in one word: patriot. My father had been in the pre-war army. He did his national service and he was a terrific soldier, and he gained his second-class marksman's badge. And I think he was very proud to wear that national service uniform. In fact, he was so highly regarded that when the Minister of National Defence came to inspect the troops, my father was actually chosen to look after everybody as a young pair of hands. The mobilisation in 1938, that really shook everybody up, and certainly it shook my father up enough to actually marry my mother at the Old Town Hall. They had about 1 year before the Germans came in, and my father actually had to leave the country. Shortly after he left, my mother was hauled in by the Gestapo and interrogated about my father. My mother was certainly a hero because for her it started a time of about 6 years of wondering whether she was going to survive the war. Particularly at the time of the Heydrich assassination, of course, she didn't know whether she would be picked up and essentially being accused of being the wife of a soldier who was in England. He actually signed up at Zagreb in Yugoslavia to the Foreign Legion, but famously, of course, there was that clause, the get-out clause, that if the Czechoslovak army was formed in France, they could transfer the allegiance to the Czechoslovak army. He crossed Europe and ended up at Camp Agda. It was a place where body and soul were stripped of much civilization and comforts that one took for granted just weeks before. It was no picnic, and certainly the following Battle of France was no picnic at all. My father joked that going up to the front on the Marne was grim in itself, and the Czechoslovaks did hold the German blitzkrieg for a while, but then he said he never ran so quickly and for so long with the German force actually behind the Czechs, and they did stop them at the Seine and the Loire, which of course are battle honours on the Czech Legion flag that is paraded. Here you see him in Chomley, and he's still got his French uniform there. After Chomley, he joined a special operation executive? Well, not immediately. He actually joined the SOE course in 1943. There are two things about my father. First thing, he was very, very fit. Having been born in 1910, he was also quite old, actually, for these things. He was 30. He regarded fitness as vital. And famously, he is shown in Jan Kubiš's album. His fitness also extended to boxing at Chomley. And the Czechs also put on these magnificent coordinated gymnastic displays with rifles. And they must have been quite amazing things for the local population to see.
He knew Kubiš and Gabčík personally.
They were very good friends. Gabčík is standing there looking whilst they rolled some grass outside their barracks at Moreton Paddocks, but trained with Gabčík on the first course. The Military History Museum found a film of where Beneš had actually visited the troops at Christmas. And when they saw the film, they noticed that my father was standing between Kubiš and also another soldier and a very good friend of my father, Václav Málek. My father was very close to so many young lads who suddenly disappeared from the company. In this case, they're digging trenches close to Chomley for anti-aircraft guns. And in this picture, there are three young chaps who joined the SOE in Scotland, and later on they were parachuted into Czechoslovakia. Wojtek Lukastík, František Pospíšil, and Oldřich Dvořák. They never came back. So my father began to see many of his young soldiers, he was a sergeant at the time, suddenly leaving and never coming back. He was very anxious to do something himself, and he then went on to do the course at Arisaig. We're very proud that his name has been put on a new slab there to commemorate those that weren't involved in actual operations but nevertheless went through the course. After doing this, they went to Ringway, the parachute school, to do the parachute jumps. My father successfully did the initial stages, and it was his last jump.
He was seriously injured.
Yes. He jumped in quite a high wind, and the parachute started to actually swing quite badly to the point where it collapsed, and he fell to the ground from a great height, and basically his body was smashed to smithereens. His elder brother, Franta, also came to England. He actually worked in the National Ministry of Defence. Franta actually organised events from local football matches to the grand events of royalty coming to inspect the troops. My father and Franta would often joke that Franta actually commanded a desk and he reached the rank of major. My father, who was dealing with a lot of dangerous things, reached the rank of staff sergeant. It took 6 months to put his body back together and another 6 months of convalescence. After that, he was offered an honourable discharge from the army or a desk job.
He didn't want to.
Well, it's a great thing about many Czechs. The one thing that wasn't damaged or smashed was his will to fight. Of all things, what did he do about the worst thing possible? He became a tank gunner, and he served during the siege of Dunkirk. His weapon outside the tank was a German Schweizer, and he actually took that home to Prague. My mother didn't think much about having that in the house, so she did ditch that in the river Vltava.
After the war, he returned to Czechoslovakia, and he became a designer and manufacturer of luxury ladies' handbags.
Indeed. It is quite incredible that despite all the soldiering that he did, he was very talented in designing handbags, and he opened up a shop on Národní, and it was called Nika. It is a derivative of the Greek name for the goddess of victory. The shop should really be called Victory Handbags.
Was he successful?
It was incredibly successful because, of course, there was thirst for fashion goods. I'm sure that had he gone on with that, he would have become one of the greatest designers in Czechoslovakia.
After the communist coup in 1948, they escaped with his mother and with yourself.
And me.
Yeah.
My greatest memory of being in Prague, and I was born in Vinohrady in 1946, was one Christmas when St. Nicholas came round, and of course he was giving out sweets to the children that were good. I'm there with my mother, but if you notice, I'm not looking at St. Nick.
You are very scared.
Yes, I was very, very scared, because of course St. Nick came round with the devil to give coal and stuff like that to naughty children. And I could actually see him dancing behind this glass door. And of course I went into toddler meltdown. Unfortunately, the devil of communism arrived, and my father did come to England. As I say, we split up for security purposes, my father going overland and I went by plane with my mother.
What did he do in England after?
Again, his artistic and commercial background led him to actually set up spectacularly successful coffee shop situated between Soho Square and Oxford Street called Scott's Buttery. He changed his name by then to make it more simple rather than Šnábl. Although, funnily enough, he retained his Christian name, which is Jiří. It almost became Czech enclave. Perhaps one of the best-known customers there was General Liška, his erstwhile commander. My father and he became very good friends. When the general died, he was asked to accompany the general's daughter, Vlasta, to the occasion.
It's about you.
Yes, well, of course, one of the difficulties was that I was almost in a small enclave of pre-war Prague, and it was very, very difficult to transition to more English ways and more English culture. Parents actually did encourage me to do a lot of activities, which I did, and one of my passions was scouting. I actually achieved the Queen's Scouts badge, which is the highest award. To do that, I earned the linguist badge. My scoutmaster arranged an interview with, of all people, Mrs. Chatardova. My wife always teases me that I only got the badge because my father was such a charming chap. Ale já můžu mluvit česky. I also was one of the first scouts to be involved in the Duke of Edinburgh's award, and one day I was asked to explain to the Duke himself how his award scheme was going.
You joined the Army Cadet?
I did join the Army Cadet Force. In those days we were kitted out in more or less the same uniform that they had had during the Second World War. I was actually attached to the Territorial Army Parachute Regiment in West Croydon.
Do you want to follow your father's footsteps?
Yes, I did, but I couldn't because I was Czechoslovak. So there were many avenues that were prohibited to me in government departments or certainly the army.
You've been for 55 years a flag bearer at different various events.
Well, I fear nearly reaching the age of 80, it might be coming to an end soon. I had actually driven my father to the Czech club quite a lot in London, and one day they asked me to carry this flag at Leamington Spa. I was there when the fountain was actually opened. There I am holding one of the flags. I was actually made an honorary legionnaire at the time of Havel coming to Brookwood. I was ordered to wear the regalia, including a black beret. I paraded with the Legion in all sorts of places, at the memorial at Camp Agda, and in many other places, and I was very proud more recently to be at Brookwood when President Pavel came to see us.
What was your civil occupation?
I qualified as a chartered surveyor. I was very fortunate to get a job with Lloyds Bank, looking after the bank premises across the country. In those days we had many hundreds of branches and huge operational premises, and we were expanding all the time. Later on, I was summoned by the top brass of the bank. They asked me to look at the rationalisation of the bank's administrative portfolio, which was getting more and more expensive. So that was that we decentralised down to the harbour side in Bristol, There was an old goods yard completely unused except for some huge bonded tobacco warehouses, really massive structures which would have taken a long, long time to demolish. So I got the permission to demolish them in 5 seconds. We actually contracted to implode the whole structures through one vast explosion, and it was the biggest controlled explosion since the Second World War in Europe.
You've done PhD in history?
Yes, I took the opportunity during my retirement to do a master's and then a doctorate in history. I helped out the Imperial War Museum because they simply had no artefacts at all of the Czechoslovak army. Also, I helped out the Tank Museum in Bovingdon as well, because although the Czechs had some of the best British tanks, the Tank Museum had nothing about them at all. So I tried to develop that over time. And the National Memorial side, it is quite remarkable that nothing was known about it at all. Nothing. In 1984, when I was asked to become a founding member of the Veterans Plot in Brookwood, because of my surveying background, I actually had to make sure that the plot was actually laid out properly. It was a very, very small thing, but with massive historic consequences. And really, it did send a very big message at that time to the regime that the vets were saying, we are still here and the freedom we fought for will come back one day.
You wrote a book about that.
Well, yes, I wrote a history, which had never been done before, of how and why the National Memorial came into being. And it is a remarkable history.
What is the main message you convey with your work?
There are 2 sides of it. There's the very early side where there was really had to be a lot of commitment to understand what was going on during those early days when the vets marched without any medals, without any Legion dress code. The whole thing was about learning more about the Legion and actually not keeping it to myself, but promoting the goodwill of the Czechoslovak army in a wider context.